Without enabling laws, statutes are without force. How traffic courts and other administrative tribunals are built on presumptions and a house of cards. In the modern administrative state, traffic courts and similar tribunals play a pivotal role in enforcing regulatory schemes. However, the authority of these bodies often rests on unexamined presumptions rather than explicit legal mandates. This article explores how the absence of enabling laws, the mechanisms granting statutory and jurisdictional authority, renders many administrative proceedings constitutionally defective. Traffic courts serve as a compelling case study, revealing how these tribunals operate on a fragile foundation of presumptions rather than constitutional certainty. To restore the rule of law, it is essential to scrutinize and challenge the presumptions upon which these tribunals are built. The legal framework, enabling laws and their role. Enabling laws serve as the backbone of any legitimate enforcement mechanism. They provide the statutory and constitutional authority necessary for courts and agencies to operate within their prescribed jurisdiction. Without such laws, statutes are mere aspirational declarations devoid of enforceable legal effect. The U.S. Constitution, particularly the 10th Amendment, reserves powers not delegated to the federal government, to the states, or the people. State constitutions similarly require explicit legislative authorization to create courts and delegate administrative power. Traffic courts, however, often derive their authority from regulatory convenience rather than robust, enabling legislation. This practice undermines their legitimacy and raises significant constitutional concerns. Traffic courts, the illusion of jurisdiction. Traffic courts function as quasi-judicial administrative tribunals, handling violations of statutory traffic codes that regulate public roadways. Their authority, however, hinges on two major presumptions. One, presumption of jurisdiction. It is assumed that individuals appearing in traffic court have voluntarily entered into a regulatory framework that grants the court authority. Presumption of consent. By obtaining a driver's license, individuals are presumed to consent to the statutory and administrative frameworks governing traffic violations. These presumptions lack explicit statutory foundation. While they may streamline enforcement, they fail to withstand constitutional scrutiny, particularly in the absence of enabling laws clearly defining the jurisdiction and powers of these courts. These presumptions further conflict with principles established in foundational case law, such as Marbury v. Madison, 1803, which emphasizes that every exercise of governmental authority must be rooted in law. Administrative convenience at the expense of constitutional safeguards. The rise of administrative tribunals, including traffic courts, is rooted in the desire for efficiency. These tribunals were designed to relieve traditional courts of minor cases, expediting the adjudication process. However, efficiency cannot justify the erosion of due process and constitutional principles. Separation of powers. Concerns traffic courts often conflate legislative, executive, and judicial powers. For instance, a single administrative body may create and enforce traffic regulations, legislative and executive functions, adjudicate violations and impose penalties, judicial function. Such a blending of functions contravenes the constitutional framework that demands a clear separation of powers. The lack of independent oversight raises concerns about impartiality and the potential for abuse of power. Due process deficiencies. Due process, a cornerstone of constitutional governance, requires that individuals be afforded notice and a meaningful opportunity to be heard before an impartial tribunal. Traffic courts often fail to meet these standards. Defendants are frequently denied the right to a jury trial, despite the Sixth Amendment's guarantee of this right in criminal cases. Procedural safeguards, such as the presumption of innocence and the right to confront accusers, are often absent. These deficiencies are exacerbated by the absence of enabling laws that explicitly delineate the rights of defendants and the limits of tribunal authority. Presumptions as a house of cards. The legal foundation of traffic courts is precarious because it relies on unsupported presumptions rather than explicit legal authority. 1. Lack of explicit consent. Obtaining a driver's license does not constitute explicit consent to traffic court jurisdiction. Fundamental rights, such as the right to travel, cannot be waived implicitly. The Supreme Court has repeatedly emphasized that waivers of constitutional rights must be voluntary, knowing, and intelligent. Fuentes v. Shevin, 7 U.S. 67, 1972. 2. Absence of enabling legislation. Traffic courts frequently lack specific legislative enactments defining their jurisdiction and authority. This omission raises ultra vires concerns, meaning that the actions of these tribunals exceed the scope of their lawful authority. 3. Due process violations. The procedural deficiencies in traffic courts often result in violations of constitutional guarantees. For example, the lack of a jury trial and the conflation of roles within administrative bodies contravene the principles established in Goldberg v. Kelly, 397 U.S. 254, 1970. Judicial precedents and constitutional challenges. Judicial precedents highlight the importance of jurisdictional clarity and adherence to constitutional principles. Although traffic courts have not been directly addressed in landmark cases, the underlying principles from relevant rulings are instructive. 1. Northern Pipeline Construction Co. v. Marathon Pipeline Co., 458 U.S. 50, 1982. The Supreme Court invalidated an administrative tribunal for exercising judicial powers beyond its jurisdictional limits. This case underscores the importance of maintaining clear boundaries between administrative and judicial functions. 2. Alden v. Maine, 527 U.S. 706, 1999. The court reaffirmed the principle that administrative bodies cannot exercise judicial powers absent explicit constitutional or legislative authority. This ruling highlights the necessity of enabling laws to legitimize administrative actions. 3. Miranda v. Arizona, 384 U.S. 4th, 1966. Although not directly related to traffic courts, this case established the principle that procedural safeguards are essential to protect constitutional rights in any tribunal setting. These precedents provide a framework for challenging the constitutionality of traffic courts and other administrative bodies that operate without enabling laws. Conclusion: restoring constitutional order. Traffic courts and similar administrative tribunals often operate on shaky legal ground, relying on presumptions rather than explicit enabling laws. This reliance undermines the constitutional principles of due process, separation of powers, and jurisdictional clarity. Call to action 1. For legislators. Ensure that all administrative tribunals are explicitly authorized by enabling legislation that clearly defines their jurisdiction, powers, and procedural safeguards. 2. For judges. Rigorously enforce constitutional standards in administrative proceedings, scrutinizing the jurisdiction and authority of traffic courts. 3. For legal practitioners. Challenge the presumptions underpinning traffic courts, demanding clear statutory authority and adherence to constitutional principles. By dismantling the house of cards upon which traffic courts are built, we can restore the primacy of enabling laws in the administration of justice. This effort is not merely a technical legal exercise, but a reaffirmation of the fundamental principles upon which constitutional governance is founded.